Hey everyone, I'm Hayne, and welcome to my channel, where we talk about how horror can be used to help navigate the stuff going on in your head and the world at large. For the first official entry onto this channel, I want to talk about one of my two favorite films of all time, the criminally underrated 1990 cult classic masterpiece, written and directed by Clive Barker, Nightbreed. I know I said in the introduction video that I wouldn't pick on films that I don't like, but I never said that I wouldn't geek out over ones that I love, so technically that wasn't a lie. For the uninitiated, I will provide an incredibly poor synopsis of the film. That being said, from this point on, we're going to be talking about xenophobia, othering, self-harm, and abuse. The story centers around Boone, a troubled young man plagued by recurring nightmares of a subterranean city called Midian, where monsters hide from the human world. Boone turns to his psychiatrist, Dr. Decker, to get some kind of insight into what might be causing these nightmares. This is when Decker informs Boone that his dreams match the case file of a series of murders, and that he has to turn himself over to the police. Boone is given what he believes to be lithium by Decker to make the situation easier to handle. Surprise, it's not lithium, it's LSD, so that Boone looks completely insane whenever he's arrested. Decker has successfully convinced Boone that he's a serial killer and set him up to be the fall guy for the crimes that Decker himself committed. Boone is picked up after wandering around in traffic and taken to the hospital under a psych hold. While there, Boone meets another patient named Narcissi talking about Midian, who graciously gives Boone directions to the city before removing the skin from his own face to prove he's worthy of joining. Don't worry, he gets in. Boone escapes from the hospital and is actually able to find Midian, which is under a massive cemetery, and the creatures that inhabit it. They call themselves Nightbreed. Boone is initially rejected by the breed. And when I say rejected, I mean attacked by only one of them with a particularly bad attitude named Peliquin. Upon exiting the cemetery gates, Boone sees that Decker has figured out where he was going and led the police directly to him. After Decker pretends to try to de-escalate the situation, Decker yells that Boone has a weapon, causing the police to open fire and kill Boone. Boone's body is reanimated in the morgue because of the bite Peliquin had taken out of him, and he seeks out the breed again, this time being accepted with open arms. As it turns out, the breed are largely non-violent and peaceful. Not you, Peliquin. They don't hide away from humans for nefarious reasons, but because they have to in order to stay safe. They used to live openly among what they call the naturals, but long ago were nearly driven to extinction because of blind hate and fear of things that humans simply couldn't understand. Turns out Decker is one of these people. He's known about the breed the entire time. The families he was targeting were all carriers of the genes that caused the breed's monstrosities. Decker is able to convince local authorities that Boone didn't really die, and was meeting with an entire army of freaks hanging around their cemetery. Humanity's penchant for excess takes over and a mob forms to cut loose the breed from this mortal coil. The film climaxes in a battle between the breed, who simply wish to exist, and the townsfolk, who have allowed hate to consume them. During the battle, Boone accepts his fate as the leader of the breed, and many of them survive, but Midian is destroyed in the process, and Boone sets out with the promise to find and create a new Midian for them. At its core, Nightbreed is a story about identity and self-acceptance. Midian is where the monsters live, but it's also representative of real-life safe spaces. The breed are representative of the marginalized groups that utilize those safe spaces in order to avoid judgment, prejudice, and harm. And the hatred of the naturals is representative of why those safe spaces are still so incredibly necessary. The dreams Boone had indicate that even before the transformation, there was some part of him that knew he belonged with the breed. And Decker tried exploiting that, thinking it would give him an advantage, but inadvertently ended up driving Boone exactly to where he needed to be. Decker had assumed that Boone would become a monster, because Decker's way of thinking was backwards. Instead, Boone accepted exactly who and what he was and ended up becoming a leader. In the end, Boone steps away from his humanity and fully embraces his role in the breed. He realizes that his identity has nothing to do with what the world sees him as, but in how he views himself. And there's a freedom that comes along with being nothing more or less than exactly what you are. So now let's talk about trauma and abuse. Everything that happened to Boone throughout the course of this film was a direct result of gaslighting by Decker. He had Boone so far gone, he was able to convince him that he had killed 15 people. And then, even after Boone knew Decker was lying, he was still able to get close enough to set him up to get killed by police whenever he exited the cemetery. And it wasn't only Boone. He was able to convince not only the local police force, but an entire mob to carry out a vigilante-style attack on Midian with nothing more than suggestions. Decker isn't just a master manipulator. He's that person in your life that will hurt you and make you think that it's your fault. Decker is that relationship that you were in that swore up and down they weren't controlling, but you knew better than to break the million unspoken rules that they set forth. It's the person that will turn all of the people that love you against you because they lie so effectively. Decker is the audience's abuser. And Boone's victory over Decker is our victory. We can deprogram and unlearn the things that they made us believe about ourselves. We can step away from the harm and reestablish ourselves in a place where we'll thrive. In the end, Decker's demise is the end of the suffering that they're allowed to inflict upon you. I feel like Nightbreed offers a really interesting perspective on the topics of self-destruction and inner demons. From the beginning, all signs pointed towards Boone belonging with the breed, but he didn't really have an understanding of what that meant at the beginning. He was under the impression that they were evil creatures, but he also believed that he had done terrible things. He knowingly put himself in danger because of his guilt, driving him to act in a self-destructive way. Then you have my favorite character, Narcissi, who mutilates himself to show his willingness to join the breed because he is so desperate to leave humanity behind that he literally self-destructs. When we're taken to dark places, the desire to harm ourselves can be overwhelming, and it's a lot more common than you would think. In a real-world situation, that could mean self-injury, but it can also mean things like self-sabotage, which you might not be aware that you do. There can be an element of punishment in this, because somewhere inside of us we believe we deserve it, but at its core, more often than not, this is more about a need for control. People living through trauma, depression, anxiety fully understand what it feels like to be overwhelmed by how chaotic this world is. Things are scary. They hurt. But if you can control the scary and the hurt even just a little bit, you still maintain some agency. We all act a little self-destructive sometimes, but when those tendencies become compulsive or dangerous, it's important to seek help. Holding on to the reins might give you a temporary sense of control, but feeling a little bit better for a little while doesn't mean that you're actually better. While Boone allowed his inner demons to drive him to self-destruction, Decker did the exact opposite thing and celebrated his inner demons in the worst possible way by hurting people. At one point, Decker explains all the time and effort that he put into tracking down and hunting those people that carry the breed's genetic makeup. He's deluded himself into thinking that his brutal acts of violence are somehow part of a higher calling. We have all encountered this person. It's the bigoted relative. It's the church leader that says that everyone that believes differently from you is the enemy. It's that random person that somehow became part of your friend group that nobody really likes, but they can't seem to get rid of, and they only seemingly exist to stir crap. Instead of working on themselves or putting forth any effort at all to gain any sense of empathy, they prefer instead to feel superior to everyone around them. And recognizing these people and limiting the amount of influence that they have over you is incredibly important for your mental well-being, because these people aren't content to simply sit with their inner demons. They want to spread them to others. Midian itself is symbolic of accepting one's personal demons, and that having an acceptance and awareness of these demons doesn't necessarily have to result in destruction of ourselves or anyone else, but rather can give us an understanding that could lead to some form of inner peace. In my opinion, one of the most important takeaways from Nightbreed is what it says about community and support systems. Midian is a sanctuary, giving a home to those that have nowhere else to turn. It may be a dark, empty space underneath a cemetery, but the breed aren't just tolerated there, they're embraced. The breed that reside in Midian are all vastly different from one another, not only in appearance, but in incredible abilities. The one thing that they all have in common is generational trauma. They've spent their entire lives, generations back, all living underground. All of the laws that they have put in place are put in place to keep them safe because of the cruelty that's been inflicted on them by humans. The breed recognize Boone as one of their own, and they become his found family, giving him a support system that he wouldn't have otherwise. And we see this all the time in real life with individuals that have lost their family and friends because of their sexuality, because of a change of religion, because they walk away from an abusive relationship. These people are vulnerable, and found families give them a lifeline. Everything about the breed society is informed by their past experiences with naturals and is intended to protect them. And if their history of mistreatment wasn't bad enough, they're traumatized again when Midian's destroyed. We see this really frequently with marginalized groups. For those not in the group, the perceived gatekeeping is seen as divisive, when the reality of it is these communities have these safeguards put in place to protect themselves. If history has taught us anything, it's that the majority can never leave well enough alone, and normally hurt the minority in the process. Instead of hurting your own feelings wondering why you can't be a part of their club, maybe consider why they have to have a club in the first place. I strongly suggest everyone to check out this incredible film, specifically the director's cut that was overseen by Clive Barker himself, because the man is a genius. There's also the source material that it came from, Cabal, that he had written, which is beautifully done. There's a series of comic books and another book by various authors called Midian Unmade that continues the stories of some of the breed after the events of this movie take place. All of them are brilliant. Thank you very much for watching, and live in fear.